Hello.
Hello, Daniel.
Hi.
It's lovely
Great
to
to
see
see
you.
you all.
Great to see you too. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this. We're really big fans of yours, and we'd love to talk to you about all of your amazing interests and your work as an educator on YouTube and Tonebase. I'd like to maybe just kick things off and ask, just sort of go right in the deep end and ask sort of what your vision is for the future of online education.
What a question to start things off. Um, Let me just one moment. I want to be able to see you more clearly here. Maybe I'll pin. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me. I've really enjoyed some of the other talks that I've gotten to see that you guys have done. And we've talked about it, and you know that I'm a big fan of Yosha Bach, and it's great that you guys had a run-in with him. Um, the future of music education. Wow. Well, you guys are students. How do you see your education? How's your education going? Like rate it from 1 to 10.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love the answer. I think a lot of people here agree with
Well, let me get a feel for the room. I mean, are you guys all, so we're all music majors here of some sort?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
performance, composition, mix of things, or
I think it's all
yeah?
violin.
I think
It's all violinist.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, all violinists.
Pianist.
Oh, okay.
No, one pianist.
Great.
Sorry.
So none of us have a future. That's great. I just wanted to see if there was somebody here with potential. No violists. Yeah. Doesn't I think my friend Callum Smart teaches at your school? No.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I should have asked him to.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So when I think about this, I try to see what I value. I try to understand what I truly value about my education or what I teach, what I've been obsessed about for a very long time. And I think it has to do with a level of secret knowledge or some sort of thing that we see in the distance and that inspires us, and we have to be a part of it. I mean, we're doing something so ridiculous. We're dragging this horsehair across these strings and making sound, and what compels us to do this as violinists. And I I would say that it's some level of secret sounds or access to ways of feeling that are impossible to achieve otherwise, and that's what we're looking for. And we may not know exactly what we're looking for, but we know when we feel it and we follow that. And that there's, I think, no matter what our individual tastes are, there's an element of that for all of us. Um, so for me in particular, that for a long time that meant, still does to a large degree, and Chris, we've talked about this, just the love for the great violinists of the past, and we're so lucky to have their recordings. And to me, they possessed a sort of secret knowledge. And so the future of education, well, things have always gone in the way of democratization, at least in recent history. And I'm always wondering, at what expense do we democratize everything, and kind of homogenize everything to some extent? I was just having a conversation recently with a friend of mine who is a curator at a historical piano museum. And so he rebuilds pianos and collects these old instruments. And he was telling me about how back in the day, even just like 130 years ago, every brand of piano had as its head of the company someone that was actually a maker and had taste, a certain kind of taste. So you look at a Steinway and you'd see the taste of Steinway. You look at a Bechstein, you'd see the taste of Mr. Bechstein. And so now he says, you can find the best Steinway in Shanghai, or, everything is so globalized. And I see this happening in education as well. So I'm always wondering at what expense do we globalize things? Is there a loss of, these pockets of secret aesthetic that captivate you, that you have to kind of work, you have to maybe travel, you have to maybe leave something behind and obsess and devote yourself to for some number of years to achieve something. So that's one kind of education that I wonder where that will be and how we will recreate that, because I think we're losing that to some degree. I don't know how you feel about it. You hear these great violinists that we all love of the past. Where's the environment to create those sorts of musicians again? Is it still with us? I don't know. It's an open question. So there's that side of it. Obviously, there's so many advantages of democratizing education. I feel like, obviously, the hot topic of the day, AI, and technologies surrounding AI have a lot of potential. I'm actually working on some AI related tools that will hopefully replace me, so I could go to the beach in Florida and just kind of yeah, unfortunately, I think with tech in kind of more broadly on the topic of technology, as classical musicians, we're sort of piggybacking off of this technology to the best, to the extent that we can, because it's never really designed for us. It's always designed for some other purpose. And, some of us, the trolls, or maybe it's the elves, kind of try to repurpose it for our own use, and maybe there's something there. So that's what I'm trying to do with AI, but AI can't really hear yet, not well at least. So there's a limit to what you could do with text, although some people are very, and that gets in the topic of different types of learning. Some people are very visual learners, some people are kind of intellectual learners, and I've seen a lot of, with my students, I have kind of an open dialogue. They can reach me through text message usually for quick feedback to questions they might have, or like send me a quick recording, and I can just kind of give them some feedback. And that's been very valuable to some of them, I think, because some people, they can do a lot with an idea, but for others, they need that kind of person-to-person interaction. So yeah, that's probably a roundabout way of addressing that, but those are some of my initial ideas. What kind of culture are we creating, and what are we losing, and is that coming back in some other form, or has it been kind of homogenized? Like you have a beautiful color, but if you mix it enough, it can disappear forever. So I'm always thinking about that. Maybe it's a little apocalyptic, but what do you think?
I've got a question from Jennifer Langridge, who is a cello tutor here at the RNCM, and she was the principal cellist of Sapphire Ensemble, which is a amazing sort of contemporary ensemble here in Manchester. But the funding has recently been cut by the Arts Council here in England. And so she's asked a few questions just regarding sort of the future of like online education as well. So, because I know obviously you've done a lot of work with tone bass and this kind of thing. So she's asked, when teaching online, do you feel like the student misses out on vital nuances that are only possible between two people together in a room? In other words, can a student gain all that they need from lessons online? And another question is that as a cellist teaching online during lockdown, she found that the students' perception of sound diminished that year. And only when we were back in person together did she realize how small their range had become in terms of color, contrast, and volume. How do you deal with this problem when teaching online?
Well, I have to say I share some of those concerns, but at the same time, I've noticed I started teaching online before it was cool, before COVID. Um, for a number of years, I was doing that, and I found that for me personally, I started to I was able to kind of I developed the ability to know how something sounds by looking at it, or at least I got much better at that skill, at least as a teacher. And I think that influenced me as a player as well. I think placing limitations on things can be a very valuable tool for developing our kind of developing a sense of self-inquiry, a sense of searching, and sharpening other tools. So I feel like nothing is lost as long as someone is engaged. So to what degree can you engage someone fully over Zoom is the question. And I agree that it can be very difficult to engage someone fully. I find myself fully engaged when I teach. Is it challenging to show certain nuances in sound? Yes, it is. It helps if the student isn't, recording themselves with a potato, and it helps. We can do our best with cameras and microphones. That does go a long way. But that's interesting that I'm sorry. What was her name? Is it Jennifer?
Jennifer.
Jennifer, yes. It's interesting that she noticed a diminishment in the student's sound. I would be very curious to know how that happened. I would like to interview this student, and yeah, I mean, is the student imitating what they heard through Zoom? And like, that's very impressive if they could imitate, a 16 kilohertz signal or whatever it was. Like, I'm not sure how all that works, but I guess I could see how some students really need that personal interaction to be engaged, right? Because I do think it's engagement. Once you're engaged, I mean, we can listen to miserable recordings from the early 20th century and have all the inspiration we need for a lifetime. Like we can extrapolate from Cortot, from Tosha Zeidel, from all these historical musicians, everything we need. And there isn't exactly a lot of range on those recordings, much less than Zoom. So there is a relative factor here, I think. So I try to focus on what aspects of the online interaction can enhance learning. I do find that I'm more organized in some ways when I teach online. I can break things down more clearly, and I can enhance it with some running outline that's happening at the same time. I'm trying to be positive about it. Let's put it that way.
I really appreciate it. Just opening up the floor. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah,
go for it.
I've been a great fan of your YouTube channel for a while. It's a brilliant channel. My favorite video so far was the two-parter on legato that you did. Nice. That really enabled me to hear my own music better, and then it opened up my ears, and that's something I realized is what is almost essential as the first step in order to becoming a better musician, is to train your hearing attention and your hearing consciousness. One thing I do share is also the fact that I'm an adult starter. I began playing the violin at the age of 19, and so it was quite late for me when I got. And I remember, and I realized. I read somewhere that you had started at 16 or something quite late yourself. So because of that, I felt like I had to adopt certain strategies to catch up with my peers, or at least keep up with my coursework. And one of the philosophies I started to adopt in this process was thinking that I did not have certain years of growing into the instrument as people have had, or I've not had the years of ear training that people have had. So therefore, I need to kind of doubt myself and doubt what I hear so many times and ask for feedback all the time so that I can get there faster, rather than I don't have time to spend time where I believe I'm doing the right thing, then do that for a while, and then turns out I was doing the wrong thing. So very early on, as soon as I began my course of the RNCM, I began to think that this process of self-doubting, this relentless self-doubting, is the way forward. But I also feel like after 3.5 years of that, I've also run into certain small hitches that I don't know if they're the result of that process or not. So and because you're a person who started late, and I love your playing as much as I love your videos and your content. What are is there something about what I said that resonates with you, or would you strongly disagree with it, or do you think that this intense you can't skip the process? It takes 15 years, whether you began at 5 or 19, to get to where you need to in the violin, or are there strategies where you can use to speed up this process as an adult learner?
Yeah, that's hitting a very important topic, and I'm starting to doubt my own thoughts on it as we speak. I think, more broadly speaking, as musicians, as artists, we should live in a state of simultaneous full self-confidence and full self-doubt, almost as like a sort of dialectic. These two sides of us battling it out. And I think from that, something strong is born. And maybe you're starting to notice that too much self-doubt has a cost. And maybe that cost is you lose a sense of love, because you lose a sense of confidence. It's hard to love something if you're not confident to some degree, because you never allow yourself to fully let go and embrace what you feel as something true, and kind of follow that route. So that's one thing, and that's a struggle, but it's also an asset, this kind of confidence and doubt dialectic. And I think in general, what's helped me a lot is a kind of dialectic approach. I don't know if it's more the Hegelian type or the what would it be, Aristotelian? Probably the Hegelian, without the political overtones. So, for example, what's helped me a lot is embracing opposing and alternating principles. For example, when you're practicing just simple things, like when you're practicing scales, it's a question of seeking discomfort. So like you shouldn't practice scales where everything kind of ends neatly on a down bow on the first note. You in specific, maybe people who start at 3 can afford that, but you can't afford it, and neither can I. You have to do scales, let's say for starters, with 16 notes per bow, so that when you come back around, you don't land on a down bow on the first note. You have to do several loops before you come back to the right alignment. I call this incongruence. I talk about it a bit in my videos. I'm actually working on a much larger scale guide to that topic. That's what we do with rhythms also. If you have a passage that's in duple, use 3-note rhythms to practice it. And it just breaks your brain at first, but that's what I found really built my strength as a player and allowed me to make up a lot of lost time, is looking for these kind of moments of discomfort, moments of things rubbing up against each other that can produce, in some sense, it's resistance training. Make it more difficult so that it's easier in its actual form. And I've really tried to live by that principle, both in practicing and in sound production. I remember I'll never forget, I had the honor of meeting Ivry Gitlis before he passed, and he showed me this thing called the scratch scale, which looks like this. Apologies. But if you achieve a very, very consistent scratch in a relaxed state, all you have to do is let go of 25%, and you have the most beautiful sound you've ever made. You know, like. So teaching yourself how the resistance between the string and the bow works. It's a relationship. It's like a pliable membrane almost. And so inventing ways of practicing, alternating opposite approaches being one of them. But I guess the general theme is in being a master of invention, as Nathan Milstein used to say. He would always invent little exercises to solve his problems. And I think that was really, really key for me, starting at the age of 16. Yeah, so for you, you know, if you're very familiar with the self-doubt side of things, I think that's a smaller part of the equation than the love and confidence in what you're doing. And so I'm curious why you decided to start so late and what inspired you to go down that path, you know, against all odds, as it were.
I took up medicine as my first degree. So once I completed high school, I was in medical college. And then during my second year of med school, I realized that I wanted something slightly more from life than what this was. At that time, my brother was playing the piano. So I said, okay, I want to learn a musical instrument, but not the piano. And turns out within a 60-kilometer radius back from the town in India where I grew up, and the only other instrument that was available was the violin in any way. So as a 19-year-old, I was playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in a room with the teacher. And that's how the journey began. In essence, so that's why I began there, and then it turns out I really did fall in love with it. But at some point I felt that the love I had for it was preventing my progress, and so I embarked on the self-doubt, and then the self-doubt made me progress much further ahead in the sense that if I was doing something wrong, I was less attached to it, so I was able to let go and go further and further into finding the better way or the more efficient way of doing things. But that actually follows up to what you're saying. So in the underlying assumption to that philosophy of practice that I took on was that it is possible to get from point A, which is an absolute beginner, to a certain level of violin mastery where you can play all the repertoire with ease in a shorter period of time than what most conventional paths might take, provided I make my life really hard, or I make smart decisions. But I met teachers who have constantly insisted that there is no shortcuts. You can do more work and make it faster, but there are no shortcuts. So I self-doubted the self-doubting. I started doubting the self-doubt itself. So it's like, so is there no way to speed in the thing? So I actually, that's the follow-up, is that, do you think there is a way, or there are ways of practices that can get someone from beginner to certain degree of violin master in a much shorter time, or there is an accepted standard or accepted path and you can maybe travel faster in it if you're talented, but you can't cheat your way to mastery at any point of time? Like, what do you believe? What do you think about that question?
Well, you just have to buy my new book. No. First of all, I think it's really healthy what you did, you know, and it's true that sometimes love can blind us, and it certainly blinded me. I started with just obsession and love. That's what was fueling me from the start. And I think that's the correct way. Like, you can't get into this so late unless you just have an irrational love for it, and it is irrational, particularly for to start so late. But I think it's a wonderful thing to do. One thing I was thinking about while you described your situation is the non-linearity of learning. Like there's a time for certain tactics, and often we confuse. We think we're employing the wrong tactic, but it's actually just the wrong time for that tactic. I think that works on a micro and a macro level. So even on a micro level, like talking about violin technique, one of the things when I like you, I remember how I learned, which is a big advantage to us as teachers, but also as players. That's one of the kind of shortcuts, is that we have a living memory of what worked, what didn't. You have to be a scientist and experimenter in your practice room, which I'm sure you are. And you remember your experiments. Hopefully you write something down as well. One of the things that bothered me a lot was learning spiccato, to do a really good spiccato. And teachers talk a lot about, the hand and how this has to be loose. And it wasn't working for me. I sounded like that, which is not great. So I started to kind of always look for what's upstream of the actual technique that I'm trying to learn. So in that case, I decided to remove the hand, remove the fingers from the equation. Like, what's upstream of that? Well, actually, it's the forearm and the upper arm. So. And so could I achieve a spiccato with the forearm and upper arm? And once I figured that out, then it suddenly started to make sense. Okay, now to do more advanced spiccato with string crossings and all that sort of thing, yes, we do need the fingers, we do need the wrist, but I learned these things in the wrong order, or I was learning it in the wrong order. So there's a non-linearity about violin technique. Every strategy that you had or you thought might have been a good idea probably is, but it might not be employed at the right time. So when I have a large body of notes that I write to myself just about what I'm practicing and how I'm thinking about things, and I think it's a good idea to always refer back to that and try the same tactics again after you've made some sort of leap in your playing, or after you feel like you've acquired some new skills, because old tactics could be their time now. So I do think that is a shortcut, if you want to call it that, combined with this knowledge, this memory of how you learned and what worked, what didn't. That's a shortcut. What's the opposite of a shortcut? A long cut. The long cut is that a lot of teachers won't know how to teach you because they are used to teaching people who started very young. And so I experienced that as well. So I became very much kind of autodidactic in that sense, mostly out of necessity. So knowing what you need and what you want and what you think you need, but you actually don't need. Like, for example, for many years, I thought I needed this, old school Soviet teacher to just like take me under his or her wing and just, make a product out of me, because I just wanted to be a strong player like people I admire. And every time I had an opportunity to do that, it ended in disaster. And I'm not the type to kind of just take advice at face value. I attack it from all sides, including my own advice to myself. And so I realized eventually that that's not what I want. I thought I wanted that. And, so embracing your unique situation can also be a shortcut, because a lot of people aren't really conscious of their situation if they've been doing this for so long. I mean, it's such an ingrained thing that we're doing. It's so ingrained that you often don't even hear, not often, always, you don't even hear what you're doing anymore. You don't really hear yourself objectively. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have as musicians. Like, can you actually hear yourself objectively? If only you could, then you'd probably adjust and fix all sorts of things. So yeah, learning to hear yourself more objectively, taking advantage of the freshness of everything. Yeah, I don't know if those are shortcuts, but hopefully that's there was something useful there, or something.
Yeah, you added another dimension in that I think until now have been looking at techniques like they're either appropriate or inappropriate for me, but I did not add the dimension of time to it, as the timing of this is inappropriate rather than the whole exercise being inappropriate on and of itself. So that actually, as you said, I do remember almost everything I've tried thus far on the violin. So I feel like that's a really interesting dimension I haven't considered. So because I've had, like you said, I've had a couple of teachers from countries behind the Iron Curtain. So and one of them I'm still with, and they have been. And the one good thing I admire about them is that they recognize that I'm different, and what they do is they sometimes just, instead of lessons being where they tell me how to do things, they just allow me to practice in front of them and just say that's not correct until I figure out how to do it well. So, so I found that, which is a recent teaching method that my teacher has employed, and I found that to be the first time where, as he said, he was encouraging me to, in a certain way, be an autodidact, as you mentioned, and that kind of has helped me. So, but I have not added the dimension of time or timing
It's so important, you know. Also, like another example of this is just basic sound production. A lot of teachers will try to give you, and rightfully so, a range of dynamics in your sound production. You know, forte, piano, everything in between, all the colors. But there's a nonlinearity to that as well. If you know, you can't. You can't really feel what you need to play a true piano before learning to play a true forte. And I feel like not enough advancing musicians, students, focus on getting a true forte sound that's really engaged with the string. My old teacher used to say, you have to engage the string. It's not a one-night stand. You know, so maybe you're working on a piece that requires soft dynamics and you're just not quite happy with it. You listen to Heifetz and then you listen to yourself and it's like, well, but I think the answer is not to practice piano more. The answer is to practice forte and to try to understand, like, what about basic sound production is being lost in the piano dynamic? Like, why am I losing quality in that? And it's not because you haven't practiced piano the right way. So that's also a question of time. You know, maybe you just shouldn't spend so much time practicing piano for a little while. It's a series of experiments, and you know, you strike me as an analytical person, and that's really going to be a great asset, and it has been probably for you, is to run little experiments and to time them and to return to them. So yeah, another thing I would recommend is, what was useful to me was to really get good at imitating what I hear. In the end, you know, to say that you independently invented your own aesthetic of violin playing sounds nice, but I could probably count on one or two hands the number of people for whom like that's actually a reality. You know, we all imitate people we admire, to some degree, and we kind of fuse things and we add our own little spice to it. And I think the idea of imitation has really been dragged through the mud in classical music. You know, a lot of teachers just kind of reject the idea of listening to recordings and getting ideas. I have a lot of questions for those teachers. So becoming good at imitation of what you hear, and being able to create different versions of things that you're doing. For example, or you know, playing around with all the tools you have as a violinist and listening and stealing ideas from people you admire. I think that's crucial, and that's not taught at all. In fact, people are afraid to teach that. Like, go out and copy of this recording. Like, when was the last time a teacher said that? You know, maybe they should say that more often. Maybe you should spend 3 weeks doing nothing but trying to copy sharing, and then destroy that by spending 3 weeks trying to copy Heifetz. And by copy, I don't mean like caricature. Like, try to understand why they sound the way they do. What are they doing with their vibrato? What are they doing with their bow speed? And if you have video, even better. What do they do with the angle of their bow? This, you know, all these things you have to become sensitive to, so that when you have an idea, because what this does is sharpen your skills. So when you have an idea, your body knows what to do to make it happen. Because you can't give your body instructions to play beautifully. It doesn't work. It's a complex pattern of motions that has to be integrated. And then you recall the pattern, not the individual parameters. And only then will it work. So by exercising all of these muscles, you're ready for many situations, and you can do what you imagine. You can try to achieve the sound that's in your mind and your heart.
Thank you. That was such a incredibly considered and helpful answer. And I do think I've gotten a few approaches to the violin that I hadn't considered all that deeply before. So I will be incorporating that into my practice. Hopefully, if there's a follow-up Q&A with you, I can tell you how things have been going in a few years in the future.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. There's a point that one of Rachmaninoff's students made in an interview that she said that one of the most important lessons that Rachmaninoff taught her was that to be really sort of hypnotic in your performance. You should sort of convey like a singular idea across, and maybe this idea of like sort of imitating these sort of singular individuals like Heifetz and Schering is to sort of get into that sort of hypnotic sort of like trance state that they hold you in as performers. Is that something that you would agree with as a sort of sentiment? And I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
I'm being hypnotized by, is that the singing happening in the background?
Yeah.
Very nice. It's very nice. It's very good. It's always interesting to hear the advice of singular geniuses, because they're very unaware of, usually wildly unaware of themselves and of others, because they're so wrapped up in their hypnotic genius. I mean, yes, if you can manage to develop a style and an aesthetic that has a hypnotic quality, then that's a great asset, and you should pretty much just milk that for all it's worth. And why not? I don't know how he would have transferred that to a student. You know, how he would instruct a student to find their own hypnotic kind of approach to the instrument. That's the challenge. But my own take on this is, you know, if how do we find our own voice, our unique voice as musicians? That's something I think about a lot. And I do think iterative, imitative, like sequences of imitation, and then destroying that with opposing ideas, and that kind of iterative process over time, I do think that is what results in a unique voice. It gets to the whole topic of authenticity and what is authenticity. And I think when someone's authentic, quote unquote, then they're hypnotic. Authenticity is when you're able to reflect faithfully the complexities of the world, the complexities of your mind, of your soul, through the medium. And well, there's authentic practice, which is kind of a different thing. But how do we find that authenticity? It's an open question. I do think it's found in this dialectic between total confidence and total self-doubt. I'm reminded of, I think it was Carl Rogers, who said that authenticity was trying to align who you are with who you'd like to be. And I think that's what we're doing as musicians. Like, we think we're practicing legato or we're practicing this technique, but no, you're practicing trying to align yourself with who you'd like to be. And so if you can do that, you'll be true to the essence of music. You'll be hypnotic, and you'll have an aura about you that is captivating. It's quite a act of ego to be hypnotic, I think. Like to be captivating, or to call yourself captivating, or I don't think there's anyone who's captivating who's unaware that they are, even if they say they aren't. So I do think coming to terms with one's ego, and coming to terms with, like, no, you're not just trying to be faithful to the score. No, you're trying to self-actualize, and go for it. So
I would say,
yeah.
Sorry, I would say that I think for me, I really enjoy Hadelich's playing, and my teacher likes my Hadelich impression. Actually, he's one of the guys that I.
Can we see it?
No,
yours, I'll do mine.
No, I won't be doing that. No. But, yeah, I think I don't know. You're right about ego, but also that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an egotistical person. I mean, I wouldn't view Hadelich as an egotistical person at all. He's a very, very humble guy, but
it's the humble ones I'm most afraid of.
Yeah, it puts you in a real trance, doesn't it? I just thought I'd say that, but yeah, you agree.
Yeah, no, I think there's a way to do it. Look, I don't think people who are hypnotic need advice. So, there's But yeah, I mean, what we would call hypnotic is only a combination. Again, unless you're ready to say you're reinventing the wheel, it's some sort of combination of things you've experienced and and things that already exist, with maybe a slight sprinkle of your own unique self, if you know yourself, which is very hard to know yourself, distinct from influences and from others, maybe impossible. I don't know. So yeah, that achieving that hypnotic state, it requires a level of blind confidence, I think, and maybe a period of egotism. I think that's inexorable from musical conviction and conviction as an artist. There has to be a "this I believe" statement, and it has to, strong opinions, loosely held, I believe is the term. So I do believe in kind of religiously following certain ideas to their conclusion, but then being ready to destroy it completely with an opposing idea and adopt that idea. And so this is kind of the dialectic approach. And that works on all levels of resolution: psychological, technical, musical. I'm always looking for that. And I think that comes from a study, deep study of how people did things in the past or do things currently, why I like it. Because that's, you can't really help liking something. I think that's one of the things you can at least give yourself credit for, that you're not under some illusion. Like, I don't know, you just like something. And that's a true thing, because you can't really explain it. And it probably predates any, like, you weren't prepared to like that thing. You weren't saying like, I'm going to like this. So you can take that as this like little nugget of truth, and then you can throw all sorts of psychology and technical things at it to try to extrapolate why you like it. What is it about that you like? How do I recreate that? How do I create variations on that? And so as long as you have some nugget of truth to hold on to, you're going to be going in the right direction. And yeah, it's when you start inventing things that aren't grounded in some sort of mysterious, simple truth, I think then you run into trouble, which I think happens when we're, the search for authenticity, and you start to kind of become an ideologue for the score and everything that's in the score. Not that there's much in a score. Anyway, there are some things, so like, I find that people that are militaristic about the score aren't usually very captivating. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's, I think, a departure from the nugget of truth. Like, show me why you love this music without telling me what color shirt Bach was wearing. No one cares. Yeah, Hadelich. He's a cool guy. He's very interesting. He has the most extreme example of, he has a lot of space between the contact point of his index finger and the neck of the violin, which is kind of mysterious to me, because that's like one of the, if you learn something for a long time, you can play it upside down. It doesn't matter. But to me, that's like one of the ways that I really know where I am on the fingerboard, is like, that's one of the contact points. So that's very interesting to see. And that makes it very easy for him to like play tenths. He's already there, because when we play tenths, we need to disengage this contact point. We need to leave, get distance, so that the first finger is free. And when we're like this is very limiting. You have to release. So he's already there. And to some degree, that's why his technique looks so easy when he's playing some very difficult things like Izai. Just, it never looks like he's straining to stretch the hand or anything like that.
So my teacher introduced me to this way of thinking about the magician versus the mechanic. I don't know if you've heard about that. I think it's quite interesting. Usually you can categorize students in particular into two categories, one being magician, who, one that kind of has confidence in their instinctive ability and will be able to, on a whim, make a performance effective, whereas another student is more of a mechanic and has to search more for the storytelling, but is very technical about their movements. And then you'll find, obviously, the elite, like Hadelich, have kind of got both. You can imagine that this guy is like, he's cut up the fingerboard perfectly. You can see him placing everything, and it's never wrong. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's quite a good way of categorizing students and players?
Probably not. It could be a false dichotomy, like the false dichotomy of music versus technique, musicality and technique. No, I think real technique is musical. I don't think you can, like, maybe you can separate mechanics from musicality to some degree, like very basic physical motions. But as soon as you get to technique, anything that steps into the world of violin and out of the world of just basic physiology, everything is a musical gesture. So I'm weary of these kinds of false dichotomies, potentially false dichotomies. I don't know if anyone. I don't know if most students are one or the other quite yet. I think they're still negotiating and trying to inhabit one or the other. But I mean, show me a student who's a magician. Like, why are they even studying? So, you know, there's that side of things. But yeah, those could be two good archetypes to have battling in your mind, and that again gets back to this dialectic idea. You know, you need seemingly opposing approaches to be battling out in your mind to make progress. So I would look at whoever the mechanics and the magicians, and I would try to learn from both of them, and maybe not spend time thinking about which one I am. I try to be both. But that's me. I try to be a chameleon because I feel like that's how I learn the most.
Yeah. I think what I meant was, I think you do understand that just being like, people in the process of learning will just tend to be one or the other, and then the end goal would be to strive to be both, rather than to just stay as one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if someone practices Sevchik their whole life and that's all they do, that could be very limiting. I think that's what Kavakos did for the first 16 years of his life. It's just pretty much just practice Sevchik and that kind of stuff. And you can see the facility. Some level of Sevchik stayed with him forever, I think. I'll leave it at that.
I do have a question that ties in with what your earlier points, and also with the question of legato as well. In the examples you show of really extraordinary violinists with faculties way beyond what I possess and I would like to possess one day, but yet they lack the central notion of a singing line of legato, of continuity. And there are many other aspects of their playing I've come to enjoy, and their tone and sound, so I don't wish to name them or even remotely even hint at that they could be bad violinists, nowhere close to that. But it seems to be more common among modern violinists as opposed to violinists of the old. And I was thinking about this, does the circumstances that produce the modern violinist, who often lacks a legato, also tie in with the same circumstances that does not produce individuality? Like a Heifetz recording or a sharing, or maybe not sharing, but a Heifetz or an Oyster recording, you hear it and you instantly know it was Oyster or it was Heifetz.
I instantly know sharing, but go on.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to that discernment yet, so maybe that's the next step in my training. But for me, I feel like it's not equally possible to find out individuality in playing. And I was wondering if those two are related, that the circumstances that produce an individual violinist also led them to somehow having the faculties to hear and then produce a legato, and those were tied in together, or because as soon as your video, as I saw your video, I began to notice it among my peers, among everybody in my own playing of even just normal scales. Like I have seen certain videos of people teaching scales online, and they cannot seem to even play 3 notes within the same bow, while everything, they are perfectly in tune, incredible sound, but they are not able to play 3 notes on the same bow in a legato manner. There's so much there's so much gaps everywhere, and since then I've been wondering what causes it. What is it? Because it seems to be systematic, that there are many people with this pattern. So do you think is there a connection between the modern lack of individuality and also some other characters like lack of legato, or what do you suppose about, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I definitely said some choice words about some famous people in those videos. Which is fine. They're doing fine. They'll be fine. I do think that's an important connection. My take on why we see this, I mean, for those of us that haven't paid attention to this before, I mean, the legato is this kind of, I would say, really started with bel canto singing and was kind of translated through early 20th century violinists. This idea of kind of really, really connecting notes. And you see today very often, if you pay attention, violinists are doing this, sometimes even to that degree, seemingly without even noticing it. And I don't think it's on purpose, because I've never heard anyone recommend doing that. You know, it's not like it's part of this vision they have. And it's not portato. Portato, which Schering and Oistrakh beautifully do, and many other violinists, this has more to do with that, which is modulations in the pressure into the string, versus what I see people doing. It's kind of like listening to a recording in backwards when you hear people speaking like this, you know, because all of the impulses are reversed. So you have little crescendi happening. I swear that's what most people are doing today. Just listen, you'll hear it. It's inexplicable to me. I think it has to do, for the same reason, this is just a list of things that grinds my gears now. The same reason that a lot of people will delay vibrato on a note, seemingly inexplicably. Some people do it literally every time, like. Like this kind of thing, basically. A lot of people in the finals of top competitions do this. Again, inexplicable to me. And that's just my hearing. I can't help it. I hear that and I just can't listen. I think it's two things. One is we live in a world where everyone's copying each other, whether they like it or not. And I think there's a sort of contagion aspect to this. So, you know, you hear all the kids on their YouTubes and Instagrams today hear so-and-so violinists and competitions. I mean, there's essentially one aesthetic of violin playing in competitions if you want to advance. And you hear that and you copy, and, you know, so that I think is very clear how that happens. And the other thing, which is maybe a little more interesting, is there is a lot of pressure on musicians now to like really play in tune, to really, like, I think more pressure than ever, just because of the ubiquity of recordings and people who play really clean, and just the standard is so high in those terms these days. So part of why you might not vibrate right away is because you spent 8 hours a day assessing the intonation of a note right as you hit it. And like, you really want to make sure it's in tune. And if you vibrate right away, I mean, it's not, you know, it's not the best way to really assess your intonation. You can sort of assess it, but if you really want to assess it, non-vibrato. So I find that players, that the more clean someone plays these days, I shouldn't say that, but I do see a connection between like playing very clean and delaying vibrato on every note. And that kills the legato. You know, I mean, there are times where you want to delay vibrato and kind of swell something. I'm not talking about that. I mean it more as a kind of pathological thing. And the same thing with legato. Maybe you want, so it's this search for certainty and a search for clarity that's demanded of a modern musician. So with legato, maybe you want to make sure that the note speaks and that it's clear and clean. And so you give it some extra, I guess you can call it a sort of articulation, a backwards articulation. And you start doing that everywhere because, you know, you're a creature of habit and that's how you practice. The way you practice is the way you play. So that would be my theory of why it happens. But I'm trying to kind of create an army of people who can hear legato and can really play with in that aesthetic. I don't think you need to sacrifice cleanliness. I think it's just kind of an artifact of an unexamined artifact. And I want to get a bunch of people in the room and interrogate them really, and just why do you do this? Like, I literally have never heard an explanation. So, you know, maybe for the next Q&A.
A community poll on your YouTube channel or something.
Well, the funny thing is, I made that video before I joined Tonebase, and it turns out like a number of those artists that I featured were on Tonebase, and so
I was wondering them. Like, I'm a Tonebase subscriber as well, and I saw the video, and then I subscribed to Tonebase. I was like, this must be an interesting staff room if there was one ever.
yeah. We don't talk about it.
Yes. Hi, I'm the pianist.
Thank you for being here.
If I could possibly offer a suggestion of a third possibility, maybe from a different perspective. I had a thought, and I wonder if this was related to our diminishing attention spans, caused by our daily lives, our daily habits, but by extension also causes a reduction of our attention to our hearing. Now, as a pianist, the most common problem that we have often with legato is the ends of phrases. We don't pay attention to ends of our phrases because for pianists, we need to hear a note before we play it. So we care so much about, we need to visualize and we know what sound we're going to make before we make it. But once the sound is made, that attention is released and we stop listening. So we don't care about the end of that note. But for, you know, someone with a bow, it's twice as complex. There's a beginning and an end that you both have to care about. And I wonder if it's that.
Yeah, no, that's such a fantastic point. I find it funny that, like, if you talk to self-respecting violinists, they'll say that, you know, they're inspired by piano and great piano playing, and you know, I'm one of them. I admire great pianists. I listen to them maybe more than great violinists for inspiration and for you know, ideas. And but if you talk to pianists, there are a lot of references to string playing, partially because of, you know, what we can do with the sustained sound. That, and you know, you have like great teachers like Shebak talking about glissandi on the piano. You can't really do it, but you can hear it. And you hear great pianists just go, and somehow they've created this illusion of glissando and beauty that it's just inexplicable with, you know, relatively few tools at their disposal. Like, how fast do you push key down, and when do you push key? There's obviously other things at play, but certainly for violinists, there's far more variables immediately obvious that we have to juggle, which is why it takes us 10 years to play Twinkle like decently. And for you, it takes like first day, you can kind of play it. It's fine. So where was I going with that? Yeah, you were talking about the ends of notes. I mean, that's something we listen. I always tell students to listen for the ends of notes. I mean, I could easily go. art of legato is listening to the ends of notes and dreaming the notes between the notes, which is what pianists have to do. In that legato video I did, I showed this wonderful clip from Christian Zimmermann teaching a student how to do legato. I don't know if you've seen that clip where he sits on the floor and has the student sit on the floor to feel the weight of the fingers and the transfer from one note to the next. And they're working on like a fast passage. And he has it, the student do it super slow, and almost do this ballet of like, how do we transfer? That's exactly what we're doing on the violin in different ways. So yeah, I'm a big propagandist for legato. And I think pianists, because of their limitations, I think are even more convincing legato. It's an even more convincing example of legato when they can do it because of the limitation. And when you can create that illusion, that's magical. And that's something I've always listened for and tried to learn from with pianists. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a sort of pointed question on this sort of topic of like, I'd like to know something I've asked various people in our own discussions before. What makes good taste? Like what is it? Because we speak of some musicians. Oh, they've got good taste. Oh, they've got like, what is it that means, and how do you develop it?
I can answer that question very quickly, but then I would start doubting my own answer immediately. And that's one of those things that it's very hard to be objective about without inviting all sorts of people to throw egg on your face. There's never enough self-awareness to make confident taste statements that will kind of survive through time unscathed. And maybe that's too grand of a thing to think about. Like, will my statement survive in 100 years? Maybe taste can be something that's just true right now, today, on the stage today for this audience. It's unclear at what level resolution taste should exist, whether it should be this kind of theoretical thing that can survive. It's kind of a loaded question in some sense, because what do you think taste is when you ask, how do I develop good taste?
In the sense that, like you were saying, you were trying to argue for legato. You're going to persuade us that taste is
how am I doing?
Is very tasty. That is worth pursuing.
Yes.
So the question is, how do you arrive at that conclusion? Is it something that is something that's more like a felt sense of this is right, or is it something that you can put into words? Is it something that's like non-proposition of this, that you know how to do and know how to feel, but just something to...
Yeah, I think when you grant some small number of assumptions, it becomes very easy to describe, at least for me, to describe what the value of a certain taste proposition is and why doing it differently is terrible. Like the argument sort of writes itself. But I guess at the heart of the question is, how do we create those assumptions? Like, how do we defend or come to those assumptions about taste? It comes from this initial nugget of fascination, I think, of hearing something complex that is mysterious, and you want to hear it again. And every time you hear it, you hear something new, or it takes you out of reality in some way. Like, that's all kind of dancing around the answer, but I think there is no obvious way to answer that literally. You have to sort of dance around it. And like, how do you describe the feeling of taste rather than what is taste or what is a good taste? Like, I can tell you what the feeling should be. And that's, I think, what it should be. And then from there, you have certain assumptions that you can make about, you know, if legato is what makes you feel that way, then we can start analyzing legato, what it really means, and do our best with that. And then that's pretty clear. So it's always about those initial assumptions, and then your analytical and sensory brain can take over and kind of create technique, create method, create everything. So yeah, it's difficult, and I have these YouTube battles with people all the time. I'm very bad at just letting something stand on YouTube. Good thing I'm not active on Twitter.
Yeah, well, I mean,
You know, like, if I believe in a certain taste, like, I really want people to try to see what I see, at least so that they too maybe can enjoy what I enjoy. And back to this idea of like the secret little pockets of secret knowledge that were very prevalent in the past. Like, you had schools of thought being developed, and there's less of that now, less of this kind of school. There's a more global school of thought in some sense, or maybe the schools of thought exist, you know, on a different plane hierarchically. So where you come from, obviously, what your upbringing is. I mean, there are so many variables that are out of one's control in terms of producing taste. But when you hear something that's mysterious and you're so captivated by it, and it just takes you over, and then that's the beginning of taste, I think. And then it's up to you to really deeply analyze that and go on an expedition that'll take years to really understand what's going on and what that person was all about. And I'm not sure if you can derive taste kind of independently of other influences. So I do think it starts with like hearing something from outside, and then all kinds of things can transform that and transfigure that and individualize it. But being open to those influences, being very sensitive to that, you know, that's that first layer of creating those assumptions, like some kind of framework. So by the time you get to the point of like legato and the specifics of legato technique, or like vibrating, you know, like little details about vibrato, then I'm so far along in this that like, if your hand moves a little bit the wrong way, like, you're dead to me. No, it's like, if I have some expectation and it's not met, I'm like, okay, it's not the aesthetic. Like, that's something. That's not the thing. It's not legato. Like, it's a yes or no. You know, there's many yeses, but there are way more no's. So when you get to that point of a taste, I think that's really far along, and that's built on many layers of assumptions and hopefully things you can explain and defend and yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of something we were talking about with Joscha Bach, actually. He was saying about, because I was asking him how artificial intelligence would be able to think sort of artistically, and he was saying something along the lines of, you know, we can sort of analyze how people appreciate art. There's some people who think that we should appreciate it because it's an important artist, and then there's some people who you know, think we should appreciate it because it sort of it tastes good to them, you know, that kind of thing. And then he said that his personal way of thinking about the next level is that you value what it lets you see or you value what you can see it through the eyes of another artist. Like we're sort of learning how to appreciate your love of legato, and so we value how you see music and that kind of thing. Abhishek, did you have
Oh yeah, I was looking to slightly question your imitation dialectic method of approaching authenticity. Now, I've been prescribed a similar approach. I was learning the Greek sonata, and my teacher prescribed me listen to Dume and recreate him. Like that's your role for now, because that's a way to start into this. I was prescribed something similar, and I really enjoyed the process. I learned a lot from it, and I wish to do a lot more in it. But something about there is a certain way I feel like it can be questioned, and it is as follows. It seems to me that the examples of authenticity we often talk about are all where all grew up or perhaps matured in years where the technology of access to recordings and therefore material for imitation was much less than it is now. And it seems to me the authenticity has slightly declined with the surplus of technology available to allow for this imitation. So but to me, your idea of imitation begets dialectic, giving rise to authenticity makes immediate sense, and I wish to rush to it. But I also feel like, again, maybe it's my self-doubting that has never stopped. I feel like I can face a doubt in that the artists we often say are authentic or we aspire to may not have had this as an approach towards where they are. So how do we reconcile the theory of it with what we see as practical examples of it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think about this very often, this idea of, if I look at the people I admire most, their environment and how they grew up and how they became who they are is something so foreign to the time that I live in and how I live in many ways. And so I'm trying to reconcile, how do I attempt to join them if I can't live that way. So I've stopped showering and do as they do. Much further back we're going. I think they also, there's some value in limitation, and you can imagine people, before the recording era, like how do they experience music? Well, they go to live concerts. And there is some power in, going to having a limited number of inputs. And it could be that a limited number of inputs means that the individual inputs are far more meaningful and impactful. And it turns out maybe you don't need 10 hours of YouTube listening to be inspired. Maybe you need one concert. And I still think that does happen. And many people, I think, need that live experience to truly be inspired. I would never go to a concert. I think it's terrible. But some people need that. So in many ways, I think we're doing the same thing, but by being flooded with a sea of possibility, dreadful freedom. We have so much at our fingertips that we don't even know what to do with it. And we can't, you're talking about attention span. We can't pay attention long enough to really appreciate any individual thing because there are so many things. And so you get into that trap today, I think. I've tried to become very good at juggling many things and many inputs and trying to treat them with the patience and the kind of calm and the focus that they deserve to really get something out of it. But yeah, I think in some ways it's better to have fewer inputs. And I think for most people, many inputs can be confusing. And so I don't know if that addresses the question, but I do think that violinists of the past, it was easier to develop taste because you had limited amount of information in some sense, and you had your tribe typically that you were in, your teacher and that sort of. So there's a lot done for you that isn't at all done today. So it's kind of a tabula rasa in some sense, and it's harder to develop taste today, I think, just because of the multitude of options and the second guessing yourself and yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Daniel. I'm Eden. I'm a violist, and I kind of had a multifaceted question on kind of habit of thought, really. It kind of links to what Abhi said about his experience with being this like self-doubting being, I guess. It is super important to be critical of oneself in a practice room, otherwise you're just playing, right? You're not improving or realizing or growing that mentality, which is so important. And the first part of that question is, how do you kind of navigate that in terms of we're being so critical and not negative, but it's close to a negative thought process in the practice room for hours a day, and we're doing this, it's our life. How do you step away from that outside of the practice room and not be this super critical being of everything? And the other side of that is, I think before I came to college and I studied loads, I could appreciate recordings in a much different way, and I could appreciate more recordings. Especially as a violist, I see a lot of violists with interesting technique, just because maybe they're too small for their instrument and the instrument's massive, it's hanging down, it's diagonally going towards the floor, and I can't help but think critically of it, even if it sounds great. How do you go about navigating those things?
If you're a sculptor and you don't have any clay to sculpt, and you spend your time sculpting, you're gonna have problems. So being critical is valuable to the extent that you have this amorphous blob of clay that you're sculpting, and what that amorphous blob is can mean different things for different people. For some people, it's your talent that you're sculpting. For other people, it's an idea, or it could be a mix of things, but there has to be something there. And I think if you're too focused on the sculpting itself and not what you are sculpting, you could get into a place where you plateau, and that being critical is no longer very valuable, and it can be destructive, and it takes over other parts of your life, and you become this terrible human being, and you have no friends. So the opposite of a violist, obviously. Everyone loves violists. We need more of them. It's a very unfortunate instrument in some ways, but when it's played well, because it's acoustically kind of imperfect, it's not the right dimension. But that's actually what gives it its beauty in some ways. It has a level of frailty sometimes that can be channeled, if Michael Tree is playing, or somebody like some great violists. It's harder to bring out the natural beauty of the viola. I love the viola. So I would say always know what you're sculpting when you're being extremely critical. You need raw material always to work with. And if you're doing it for its own sake, or because you feel like you should be critical or something like that, you run into problems. I don't know if that strikes a chord at all, but for me, that was a big issue in my time in the practice room when I was studying. I would get into these kind of endless self-critical spirals regarding intonation, and kind of I didn't know what was left and right anymore at the end of the session. And once I stepped back, and I mean, it sounds corny, but you realize, okay, this is music. What am I doing with this music? What is the raw material I'm sculpting here? A lot of things started to fall into place, and I got one of the dangers of being overly critical is that you lose the ability to utilize your talent and your natural, instinctive, intuitive understanding. So much about playing the violin or the viola is intuition. As much as we want to materialize it, like in the end, it's intuition, because the motions you are doing are so complex. They're, it's what's the word? Emergent. It's an emergent quality, like how you're able to do this and everything that goes along with it. You're not a computer. So by being overly critical, you can start convincing yourself that you can have this mechanistic approach to things that doesn't, in the end, it plateaus. So being aware of when plateaus are happening and then changing directions very drastically with your approach, I think that's very, very important. It reminds me of like when the Guarneri Quartet used to rehearse, they would have all these arguments, and Arnold Steinhardt would kind of sit back and kind of watch this all happen. He wasn't the argumentative type. And after enough of seeing this, he's like, come on, guys, let's just sing it. Let's just sing this. And like, it would work. Yeah. So yeah, that is, again, it's back to this dialectic approach, or at least just being ready to destroy everything you've worked for the day or for your lifetime or whatever. Like that, you have to be ready to do that, whether it's technique, whether it's your mental approach, whether it's your setup, whether, and that's a dangerous proposition, building something and destroying it. But for me personally, that's been very useful, and for many of my students. And then you can decide how much of that is appropriate for you. For some people, they're building something, they shouldn't destroy it. It's like, it's fine, and you just got to keep building it, and like, it'll make you happy one day. Something like that. Like, there are people who don't really change much throughout their life as musicians. Heifetz, after like 1920, late 20s, he essentially creates his personality on the instrument, his truly unique personality. And the rest of his life is essentially like maintaining that level of like perfect delivery of that aesthetic. Right, there isn't this like grand evolution in his playing, I would argue. Some people say that his last concert shows some differences. Obviously there are some differences, but he wasn't engaged in this battle of like destroying and rebuilding and destroying, rebuilding, at least not obviously in his playing, probably more in his personal life. So people are different. Yeah. So you have to try to understand what being critical is doing for you and what you're being critical of. What's the raw material? That's what I would say.
I wanted to ask, because earlier you said like strong idea, loose grip or loose hold or something on that line, and then I'm just thinking like this building, destroying, how, like, just playing the devil's advocate, how does does this not paralyze you? You end up just going, I don't want to waste all the time I have, I don't want to start again, anything I do can be wrong. I think maybe that's along the line of what this doubt can be as well, just that. How do you not fall into that, or how do you overcome that?
I think that gets back to the topic of being simultaneously fully confident and fully doubtful of yourself. And maybe the doubtful side is this kind of destruction and rebuilding. And the confident side is what you feel to be true, which stays no matter what you're building and destroying. So there's that kind of side of it, but more practically speaking, I think you should see the results of that seemingly masochistic process. You should see the results of that pretty quickly. It's not a mental exercise. Like, it's a very clear distillation of whatever you're doing. Like, even on the most fundamental level, like when we practice and with rhythms, we do one rhythm and then we destroy it with the opposite rhythm so that our fingers can figure out some sort of evenness that lives between them. And you can extrapolate that there's all kinds of practice techniques that utilize that sort of approach, but I think you immediately see a benefit if you're doing it right. It would depend on what your motivations are for destroying and rebuilding something. And if the motivations are true and come from an authentic place, I think you see the benefit of it, and you keep doing it and you keep finding ways to do it. Just once you have the idea and you know how to look for, part of it is learning how to look for those opportunities to destroy, constructive, like becoming anti-fragile or something like that. Mr. Taleb has joined the chat.
I was just commenting on this idea with this sentiment that comes from this sort of idea of, like you said, about the dialectic approach, where trying to get opposing ideas to sort of arrive at the true conclusion. I think, is there a final goal in mind when this is your mindset? Is there something like that you're aiming for at the end of the path, or is it just sort of just destroy what I have all the time? Because otherwise it's just a cycle of internalizing. What would you say? I think we were talking about sort of spiraling inwards. Yeah. We were talking about this kind of thing, actually, just surprising, sort of linking discussions together with John Vervaeke, one of our previous guests. He was talking about this in terms of addiction as a cognitive scientist. So he was saying about addiction being like an inward spiral, saying that you're progressively narrowing your frame of reference to it has to be this way. What about if the goal was to, instead of spiraling inwards, to spiral outwards? John Vervaeke calls this what it is. He calls it love is the opposite to addiction. And I was wondering, maybe as a way to sort of reframe this idea of the dialectic, it might be an idea of to try and circle back to love and loving the practice.
Sounds like a Lex Friedman question. Bring this back to love. Wait, so he said the spiraling inwards is a bad thing? Let me just get that right.
It's he was trying to. It's something that comes from his studying of what's his name? A friend of his who's an addiction specialist. I can't remember exactly his name. Comes to me later, but basically. The idea of addiction is that you become more and more dependent on the thing that you're addicted to cause that high, and so it becomes inward and more. What would you say? His idea is something to do with what he calls the agent arena relationship, and it's the agency becoming diminished over time in terms of the addiction process. But instead of that, he suggests sort of spiraling outwards and trying reciprocally opening. So, for example, he talked about two people falling in love with each other. They're revealing something to each other, and the deeper they go, the more in love they feel towards each other. I don't know, just if that's a good.
I mean, I can imagine a scenario where that love relationship, where the line between that love relationship and addiction is somewhat blurred. I mean, we like these strict categorizations of things, but human psychology probably doesn't work like that. I'm not enough of an expert to speak on that, but yeah, I mean, I think you have to become addicted in the strict sense of the word, because I think what some of these great thinkers miss is a relationship to the physical world that they invest themselves into 8 hours a day, every day for like 15 years. They often don't have that, which is, it's interesting, like hearing thinkers I admire, like a lot of these public intellectuals, talk about art. There's always something about, or music, there's always something about it that signals, yeah, you haven't spent like that much time studying art and music, and like, you know, no offense, but like, okay, yeah, I get it. And I think once, like, trying to contend with the physical world, which is what we're doing when we're learning an instrument, we're contending with something real that's going to give us feedback that we might not like. And that's very valuable, and it's out of our control in some degree. And so we're wrestling with this. There is a level of addiction necessary to kind of convince yourself that it's something worth doing. But to your earlier question about what the goal of all of this is, it's freedom. The freedom to express what you feel. Ultimately, I think that's the goal of art. And it's something very lofty that's tossed around a lot. But I think technically it arises from this continual rebirth and continual destruction and rebuilding and changing of directions and opposing opposite principles. Like, I really see that as the way to become more and more free, gradually more and more free, and to not rid yourself of weakness, but to more utilize your strengths and to come to understand yourself better. And that's something I realized, like, when I was in school, my focus was to like get rid of my weaknesses, work on my weaknesses all the time, you know. So I'd practice things that I hated playing because like I just didn't feel I was good at them. And that was useful to a degree. I still do some of that, but that energy transferred more into what are my strengths, what do I love, and how do I make that a comprehensive thing where I don't even need to touch that other stuff that I perceive as a weakness or whatever. For example, like there's certain repertoire I just don't play, I don't perform, because it's just not, either I feel like I have nothing to say here that hasn't been said, or I know someone who does this in their sleep, and for me it's like a lot of hard work. Like, why do I, you know, just why don't I focus on something that speaks to me, that I feel I have a curious kind of advantage over many people I meet, like, oh, this is easy for me, or like, oh, I feel like I have some facility here that, you know. So you're always comparing yourself against others, and so I think that could be one way of finding your calling. And so that's achieved through an iterative process and through a destructive process, and the goal of which is freedom from the constant self-criticism that you needed to get to the freedom. Yeah, and I think once all the criticism is done, like for some particular period of time, and you have something that has been built from that dialectic, like you destroyed, like you threw everything at, and you did the opposite, but yet something persisted of what you worked on. And you know, I think you feel that. It's hard to describe. You feel that, and that's the thing you hold on to, and that's what makes you a little bit more free. So yeah, addiction is
The case
bad.
to be made that the destruction dialectic that we speak of is the opposite of addiction, because in addiction you're spiraling inwards and your focus is getting narrowed, but here you're destroying the limitations of your focus is expanding, so you're just adding more and more to your thing by destroying the previous limitations to that. So in some sense you're spiraling outwards through destruction, not inwards in a certain
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah, maybe it's spiraling outwards. I think it's about knowing when to quit cold turkey and having the ability to quit cold turkey. As you know, every addict will tell you that that's not a thing. You weren't really addicted, like that's not a thing, which is probably true. But you know, all jokes aside, we're lucky that this addiction is not, you know, so destructive to our life, like many others. So yeah, I do think like this idea of quitting cold turkey, like being really, really categorically into something and spiraling inwards proudly, but being ready to step outside of that, and spiraling into another direction. I think that's very important, and to know when it's time to do that, and to know which direction to go into, following your curiosity. You know, that's a very individual path. But I'm surprised at how many people I meet that never really engaged in that. And at very best, they can kind of exist in their aesthetic and their taste in a very like limited scope, and I can't go outside of it with them. And maybe that's my defect, that I like to kind of I try to understand more than one way of doing things, even if I believe in that way. I don't know. I'm always surprised at, you know, like very high level people. Sometimes maybe they're misrepresenting themselves, to not seem like they lack confidence, but that they don't engage in this kind of addictive series of addictive behaviors. I think it's really valuable. Maybe it's just because I was always making up for lost time, and that's a tactic that helped me. But I think it continues to help me. Yeah.
I have a continuation of this kind of question, but more personal, I guess. In the with this destruction construction thing, especially with technique, it doesn't fix itself. It doesn't. I can't change to this new format over a day. I can have a light bulb moment, and I'm like, oh, brilliant! That's what I need to change. That's what this player does. That's what my teacher meant. But then I go to a chamber music rehearsal or something, and because it's not in my muscle memory, if I try to play with that technique, this new technique, it just sounds awful because it's not there in the accuracy yet. So I kind of have to default back to what I've been used to. So progress has been quite slow with a lot of technical things sometimes, just because the amount of groups and ensembles I'm in as a viola player sometimes outranks the amount of practice I'm doing.
Sure.
What would your advice be in transforming technique and new muscle behaviors whilst still playing accurately and not just wasting everyone's time in rehearsals?
Yeah. The stickiness of new ideas is not always all that we'd like it to be. To some degree, I think you have to be an actor when you're essaying a new idea. You have to, that gets back to the idea of like becoming really good at imitating, I think is a good tool to have. It's very individual. Some people people are on different sides of that spectrum, but it could be a very simple thing. I mean, it depends, of course, what you're trying to change in your technique. But for me, sometimes when I make drastic changes, I try to make them as simple as possible. So I try to boil it down to, okay, use more bow or use less bow, like a simple directive that, and baked into that is this new thing I'm trying. So I think getting comfortable with, it depends how you're practicing, like getting comfortable with experimenting with extremes.
Would you say you're kind of giving yourself a placebo in a way, in that you're telling yourself?
No, I don't think so. No. Because you're producing sound and you're producing something objective that there is a real effect happening here. Unless you're airbowing, it should always be resulting in a real product. So maybe you have to go. Maybe you have to think of for everyone it's different. It's not enough to just say use more bow. Maybe you have to think of someone who uses more bow and like, what do they look like when they do it?
Okay.
Who sounds
You're
great.
thinking of things always in the context of a larger idea.
Of a personality. Like, I think that every musical effect is an aspect of a personality, and I like to frame things like even to the minute, like articulation is like, I imagine a personality, and maybe it's an existing violinist who kind of embodies that idea. And when I look at them, I hear them, I see that, I notice that. Okay, so I right click, save as articulation or something, and I have that mental and sensory image whenever I think of that thing. So it gives it a real personality. I think that then it's easier to start to inhabit that and to try to take something from that personality into your own, as opposed to like a cut and dry sort of, well, I'm going to try playing it this way now. And like, yeah, of course it falls apart once you go into chamber music and like suddenly you have to read music and do all the, So I think if you can, this is probably some kind of Jungian thing anyway, right? Like look at everything as a personality, and you can more quickly absorb it into yourself and make something feel natural, and then it survives chamber music rehearsal or whatever, and you can absorb it more quickly. So I would be always looking for that. So it depends, of course, on what you're changing. But I think if what you're changing is worth doing, it's probably connected to music, even if it's a very, very technical thing. It's probably connected to enhancing expression in some way. And then it can be connected to a personality, I think, whether an existing or made up one.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Can I make a comment? I was just thinking that your suggestion about like practicing imitation, getting really, really good at it. The way I interpreted that is practicing flexibility to have so many tools in your toolkit that you're able to make any sound you want to create in here. So as an extension of that comment, I was wondering if there are ways to practice flexibility, and whether you think practicing flexibility would be the answer to Eden's question, which is, because his problem is, I'm not able to immediately do this in the chamber music rehearsal, but what if you are? Like, what can you do to make sure?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Maybe the issue isn't that you're not able to do this thing, it's that you're not able to be flexible. Right. So if you just kind of zoom out of what it is you're really trying to do. So yeah, it could be practicing flexibility. I mean, I don't know how to practicing flexibility. It probably is similar to what some of the things I've been saying. It could be as simple as getting into the habit of trying things like 5 different ways. And ways that you can get behind. Like that's not easy to do. Like play a phrase, maybe start with three ways that you could legitimately sell on stage. You'll find that that's very difficult to do. And once you get really good at that, I think that transfers into like very technical things as well. Like you that is flexibility, I think. Because you can derive a lot of these technical tools from music, which I think is always what we should be aiming for. I think practicing technique to improve your music is the slow way. I think having a musical conception, a musical gesture, and then seeing what technique is involved in creating that, I think that order of operations is more useful. You know, like I can, playing that, I can go, yeah, I can practice kind of clean, collé, and this kind of stuff. Or I can practice doing this gesture. And like, how do I, breaking things down into small musical gestures, which have all sorts of techniques built into them. But the goal of the technique is very clear. Like you're trying to do something with the technique rather than, you know, you could spend an hour. Maybe you have to do a bit of that, but always quickly going back to how do I integrate that into the gesture of whatever music I'm playing, and making these loops. I practice in loops all the time. Take one bar, take half a bar, play it on a loop, you know. And every time, you know, obviously you have a goal with why you're doing that, but every time you're trying to make it more convincing, trying to perfect that gesture. And in doing so, you're doing all kinds of technical work, obviously. So I think that is a good way to develop flexibility, practicing from top down instead of from bottom up. Yeah, that's one of the most important things I think I've learned is to practice. Like, how do you practice repetition? Like, how do you repeat things in the practice room? Like, repetition is such a big part of what we do, but there's so many ways that it can be done wrong or just less useful or waste of time. And I think the best use of time with repetition is to create these loops of like snippets of some kind of story of the music, so that you never lose that you never just sit there in a mechanical world for too long. I think that's important.
I think we're slowly running out of time. Is there anyone who's got any more questions? Maybe I could just sort of wrap things up. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about this approach is something that I also really admire in some of the other guests we've also had who talk about different subjects as well. So, for example, in terms of, because we've talked about a bit of philosophy with you in this session about dialectic and stuff. With our discussion with someone like Michael Sugrue, who's got a YouTube channel where he uploads lectures on all different thinkers who have opposing ideas. The way he's able to put these ideas across is I can't tell what he actually thinks about the thinker. He just puts the ideas there, and he's incredibly transparent, like you were saying about the idea of being an actor when you're trying to try out a new technique. Something I really admired in his way of teaching, and I'm just trying to draw this into a sort of a question or a comment. I think what I really appreciate about this idea of sort of discovering your ignorance by trying to destroy with different opposites, it links into this sort of philosophical approach to practice. And I think maybe the last question I'd like to ask is something along the lines of how do your philosophical interests guide your practice? How do you put them into practice, and how do you what makes you interested in the sort of philosophy in the first place?
Well, I think I'm comfortable enough to admit that philosophical interests for me, I'm always trying to connect what I'm learning or the information that I'm processing to a framework that I'm building, and try to see where I could plug it in so that it, takes me to the next step of building whatever framework I'm trying to build. So it's very self-serving, it's very motivated, and but I'm ready to destroy it if I need to. The framework. So I don't think it's very hard to be this like objective person, I think, and that's somewhat overrated, I think. And yeah, I think taking things from wherever you can find, do what works and get it from wherever you can, was a philosophy that I first kind of really started to understand after I was obsessed with Bruce Lee for like a year, a long time ago. And that's, how he developed his method, Jeet Kune Do. You do what works and you take it from wherever. So this it's a hybrid approach. So yeah, maybe my interest in philosophy is so amateurish that's really the point of it. I'm not trying to kind of understand everything, but rather I'm trying to see what ideas can enhance or question or interact with a framework I'm already building. So it's very motivated. I suspect many people might be in that same sort of thing, whether they admit it or not. The idea of an objective observer is highly questionable. I was just listening to a podcast with, Tyler Cowen's podcast,
No.
Conversations with Tyler. Fantastic. So he's an economist and kind of also like a public intellectual to a high degree, and he's like a savant in terms of intellect and kind of curiosity. And he had on this guest who was talking about Milton Friedman, and like his background and just the historian. And Friedman was often criticized for, and this is a critique of economists and researchers in general, is that like you can't go into testing a hypothesis without priors. Like he didn't think that was possible. That he thinks that because of your interest into going into that, you will have priors, and you shouldn't be ashamed of that. And I'm not representing the philosophy as eloquently as it was delivered, but just this, the fetishization of objectivity, I think, is rife in the world of philosophy. So I like to kind of find people that have things to say that I can understand and not pretend that I understand.
Well, maybe one way to sort of wrap things up is to think about the idea that if these things that you're absorbing from all these other interests go into that sort of singular musical identity, then that's what makes your music so hypnotic. So
it's very, I think it's, for me at least, it's been very difficult, and it's been a long journey of like, can I be on stage and truly embody some kind of like, really believe that I am creating a unique moment in time, saying something that no one's ever said, that's very personal, that's very authentic and genuine. I think that's very difficult to do if you're really being honest. And the more you examine it, the more difficult it becomes, because the more you realize you're the result of a number of influences, and the more you start to see like where things come from that you do. But I do think there's a light at the end of that tunnel. And I have started to appreciate it more and just really appreciate what live performance can do. Sometimes very unexpected things if you're ready and open. Like all these kind of cliche things about the energy of the audience, like those are real things, I think. Not cliche.
Yeah, well, I think you're dead on there with the importance of live performance. I think we we miss it if it wasn't an opportunity, like especially over COVID. I don't think anyone was.
Yeah. Remember when people thought that like performing over Zoom could become a thing? That like living room performances, like recorded with a potato, of course, listened through like the Apple earbuds, like that can be an experience worth having for an hour. I remember those days.
Anyway, I think that's probably time to end, because there's a concert happening in a few minutes.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun to chat with you guys, and wish you guys all the best in your studies.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. It's been a joy. Bye.